This episode of Getting Geeky with Game Relief is being powered by Kolossal Games, who just launched a new game on Kickstarter just recently called Terrors of London. You'll definitely want to check out this Kickstarter campaign, as it is a classic deck builder set in horror-filled late London back in the way days. Yeah, definitely check out Kolossal Games' latest Kickstarter, Terrors of London, which is going now through the 19th of August. Plus, if you're at Gen Con, you definitely want to go back and listen to our Where's Waldo Gen Con giveaway episode. It's the one right before this. So go back and listen so you can win some wild, crazy, awesome prize packs from some of the people you're tracking down.
Getting Geeky with Gamer Leaf, the podcast in which one man strives to level up his geekhood and helping you do the same, one battle at a time. Now, let's get geeky with Gamer Leaf.
Have you ever wanted to be a villain? Do you dream of harnessing the power of a storm? Or flexing superpowered muscles? Or bending reality to your whim? These powers and more are within your grasp in Villains and Henchmen.
You must break a fellow villain out of maximum security prison. Along the way, you'll defeat meddling heroes, overcome troublesome obstacles, and plow through unsuspecting guards.
Of course, the good guys aren't just going to sit around while you waltz in and grab your villainous buddy. No matter which prison you're attacking, or which heroes are in your way, scheming to have the right powers for the job is a must.
You may have to shapeshift into a stronger form, phase through a steel door, or protect the team with a well-timed force field. There is no single path to success. Adaptability and teamwork are critical to victory.
But remember, you are playing bad guys. If the prison is defeated, one of you will claim bragging rights as a true villain, relegating the others to mere henchmen.
Did that sound familiar to you guys? It didn't to me neither, but that is a story of Villains and Henchmen, a new game that's currently on Kickstarter, and tonight we're lucky enough to have on one of the creators and masterminds behind this great game, Ben from Ravensdale Publishing. Is that correct, Ben? Is that how you fit in line with Villains and Henchmen?
That's it, yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us on Getting Geeky with Game Relief. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
No problem at all. Now, before we get into talking about the whole reason you came to join us, let's rewind a little bit if we could. We don't have to go back too terribly far, of course, unless you were born into tabletop board gaming. But how did you get started into playing tabletop board games and whatnot, Ben?
Actually, I was kind of born into it. My parents were big Dungeons & Dragons fans. They played all the classic board games, Risk, Monopoly, all that stuff when I was growing up. So it's definitely genetic for me. And then my wife, who also helped design it, she kind of got into it out of, she was a big fan of anime, and then the friends she hung out watching anime got her into Dungeons & Dragons and games and stuff like that. So we kind of ended up in the same place via slightly different routes.
Well, there you go. Awesome. So you said you talked about playing classic games, D&D and classic games or whatnot. Did you transition at some point over to, I guess, what they call, I don't even know what they call it, what games have become today? I guess hobby gaming?
For sure, yeah. Like I said, we started off with Dungeons & Dragons in my house, and then played a lot of the classics. And then I went to Gen Con at the end of my high school, after my senior graduation. I paid for my own trip to Gen Con and played Settlers of Catan with a friend in our hotel room before the convention started. And that's how I realized that board games could be more than what I always knew them to be.
Awesome. And were you going to Gen Con for board games or just for the heck of it? Or you just needed something to do for a senior or graduation trip? Or
I was going for kind of a graduation trip. I went completely by myself. First trip I ever did like that. And I was mostly going for the Dungeons and Dragons tabletop RPG scene, and then kind of discovered how huge board gaming really was outside of, like I said, kind of the classic board games. So it was pretty awesome.
For Gen Con, do they have a pretty big D&D following there as well? I know I've heard of board games and stuff.
They do. At least they did back when I went. My wife and I haven't been back to Gen Con in probably a decade because it's a bit pricey to get to from California. But yeah, they had a pretty big tabletop RPG fan base, as well as LARPs and the board games and all the other stuff they've got going on. They're pretty diverse.
Awesome. And then you said you sat down to play Settlers of Catan and never looked back, it sounds like.
Although I'll be honest, I kind of hated Settlers. It's not on my gaming list at all these days, but it did introduce me to, the more modern style of board games. So I thank it for that.
Oh, wow, that's interesting that you hate the game that brought you in. I hadn't heard that story before from anybody.
I think it was kind of one of those things where I recognized the potential in it, and it might be that I didn't so much hate the game itself as I hated that session of it, and if I went back and played it again, I might like it, but I've found so many other games that I do love that, who has all the time in the day to play all the different board games, so...
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, it makes it a little rough. I sat down after my wife and I got into it or whatnot, sat down to play Imperial, I think it's called Imperial Settlers. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. And I didn't care too much for it. It's hard to say if it was just because I was sick and tired or whatnot. I really wanted to like it, but wasn't able to. I would like to go back at some point. But like you said, there's so many unplayed games that wanting to go back to one that you had a hard time with makes it a little bit hard.
Yeah, for sure. It's nice that there's a wealth of options out there, but it does make it difficult to really play all the different games that you want to play. And my wife and I haven't even finished playing all the games that we own yet.
I feel you. Yeah, I feel you there. So speaking of that, the games you own, I've heard of them both called Shelf of Shame, but a while back ago I also heard Shelf of Opportunity because they're games that you have an opportunity to play. So for this year, is there any games on your Shelf of Opportunity that you and your wife would like to get to the table when you can?
Absolutely. We want to get Cthulhu, or no, not Cthulhu Wars. Reign of Cthulhu, I think is what it is. It's basically Pandemic, but kind of with a Cthulhu flavoring to it. So we'd like to play that. And there was another one. We want to play more of the Dark Souls board game. We've broken it out a couple of times. We haven't finished a full playthrough yet, and we really enjoy it. So
awesome. Is that the one after the Dark Souls is a video game as well, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. It was Steam Forged Games, I think, is the producer for the Dark Souls board game. So that's the one.
Awesome. So yeah, those are the two you want to get. It's hard to say which ones I want to get. I know me and my son really wants to get ray guns and rocket ships to the table. It's trying to find how to play videos. If they don't have them, I don't really care for rules. But we did recently. Today we actually broke out with Rivet Wars, and so that was kind of fun. It took forever to figure it out though, but I think we're on to something, so it looks like a pretty fun game. But we really want to play ray guns and rocket ships, as well as Clank. It's just trying to find good how to play videos or whatnot. Now, jumping back to your Settlers of Catan, I don't know how much you remember other than the part that you didn't like it, but as a designer and whatnot, what would be one thing you would do to change it? Or
I think for me, because I have that background in Dungeons and Dragons and those kinds of games, when I play a board game, I like games that have a kind of a sense of adventure to them. So games that are heavily rely on like an economy where you have to trade things with other people or try to steal things from other people to build something, it doesn't really suit the kind of, it doesn't really suit what I'm looking for in my gameplay experience. So I think for Settlers, if you were to, I honestly don't even know how I would change it. I would probably reduce the amount of like trading and maybe I'm misremembering the game here, the kind of the backstabbing, like stealing cards from other players and stuff like that, and make it more of a narrative thing, if at all possible. And I don't know how you would do that, because again, I haven't played the game in 17 years now. But yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Wow, yeah. Speaking of that, like I recently there's a thing I'm following on Facebook or whatnot. It sounds like I've been graduated from high school about 20 years ago. So you're making me feel even older than I was feeling previously.
Well, I mean, I graduated from high school in 2001. So if you graduated 20 years ago, you were only a couple years ahead of me.
Yeah, just a couple, but yeah, still making me feel a little bit older, so that's awesome. But it sounds like you've been into the gaming field a little bit longer than I. I recently, it was a couple holiday seasons ago that me and my son that actually sat down to play Rivet Wars today. He'll be 10 in September, but a couple years back, we sat down after watching a Rodney Smith how to play video of, a Viking game with from Cool Mini or Not, let's say Blood Rage. We sat down to play Blood Rage, and it was like Christmas. And so ever since then, just kind of loved gaming. And lately, well, for the last year and a month or year and 2 months, I've been doing the podcast. So been kind of going overboard on interviewing people because I really like that aspect of it. So don't get too much time to play games, but so that's awesome. But yeah, so going with that. And the word on the street is you created a new game on Kickstarter. But before we get to that, the meat of why you came here, let's take a quick short break to talk about a few other games that are on Kickstarter in our Kickstarter Corner. So just bear with me for a moment, Ben.
Sure.
What is this place? What is it doing here in the Leaves computer? Oh, it's Kickstarter Corner with the Leaves.
Kickstarter Corner with the Leafs, like she said. Before we get on with that, if you're at Gen Con listening to this right now, make sure you go back and listen to our previous episode. It is actually the updated one of, I believe it's called, what is it called exactly? You want to get the right one because we did a previous one, which you don't want that one. You want to get the newest one. Let me tell you what it's called. It is called, let's see, I can tell you right now. You want to listen to updated Where's Waldo Gen Con giveaway episode 4. You'll be able to find out how you can go about winning some pretty sweet prize packs if you're at Gen Con. So go back and listen to updated Where's Waldo Gen Con episode, or Gen Con giveaway episode, whatever you want to call it. But anyways, on with Kickstarter Corner, shall we? First, we've got Kingdoms of Erden, King of the Mountain, Dwarven expansion. You collect faction members and dominate the mountain in this fantasy set collection strategy card game for ages 10 and older, 2 to 5 players, 15 to 45 minutes. They're over, 379% of their goal, and they're still, at the time of this recording, about 30 hours to go, so about 24 hours or so, depending on when you're listening to this. So definitely jump in on King of Erden, the King of the Mountain, Dwarven expansion, ending on Friday at 5:07 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. So you better get in on it right now while you're getting good. Next, you probably heard our interview or our review of the first edition of this game, but check out Clustered, second edition. It's a strategic card game. Battle your opponents by placing cards with matching attributes next to each other. Can you out-strategize everyone to win? As you know, if you listened to that episode, Game Relief, myself, wasn't able to, but you better go check this out. It's got a week left at the time of recording, ending on Thursday the 9th of August. Next is Incoming Transmission. It's a co-op sci-fi pixel board game. Incoming Transmission is a 16-bit inspired cooperative puzzle game for 2 to 5 or more players. It takes about 10 to 30 minutes, and it's from the designer of Eidolon. I would definitely check it out, even if it's just for the box, as it reminds me so much of the Super Nintendo, which my wife says is about out. So hopefully we'll be able to get the mini Super Nintendo that's coming out. Next, her name was Marla Jones. She used to be happy, a sweetheart housewife, cooking and tending to her garden of dandelions. When the world turned crazy, Marla learned pretty quick to shift gears, from a loving housewife to a mean, shoot first, ask questions later kind of girl. My mother raised me to be a devout wife, a good mother, and a productive housewife. But when my beloved Billy saw fit to blacken my eyes one time too many, I thought I should point out that he's making a mistake. And I pointed that knife in and out several times until he stopped yelling. Maybe not the most family friendly, but this game is also for 14 years and older. It's Moonshiners of the Apocalypse, which is currently on Kickstarter. Next time, tune in to, well, not next time, but in 2 episodes, tune in to find all about Samuel Connery, as he's the next character on our Kickstarter Corner. Anyways, let's go back and find out what do you call it? Yeah, let's go back and find out exactly what Ben has to tell us all about heroes. Not heroes. I mean villains and henchmen. What am I thinking? Trying to make his game be about good guys? Well, back to the interview. Already in progress. Okay, we're back, and now, like we were saying before, the word on the street is Ben recently created a new, well, I don't know how recent, how long this has gone into the process. I imagine not just recently, but the word on the street is you have a new game on Kickstarter called Villains and Henchmen. What can you tell us about this great game, Ben?
Well, Villains and Henchmen is a game where you get to play the comic book bad guys. Everybody gets to play the heroes in pretty much every game they play, or you read about the heroes, or you watch the heroes save the world, or whatever the case may be. And in this game, you actually get to play the bad guys trying to carry out some nefarious scheme.
Oh, wow. That's kind of interesting. I always me and my children, we prefer the bad guys. Like when watching movies like the different Disney villains and just different villains, we really fell in love with, well, at least I did. I really like Mega Man, or Megamind it is, with the villain.
Right. That was Will Ferrell, I think, did the voice for that, right?
I believe so, yeah. It's been a while since I saw it, but I believe so.
Yeah, that was a good one.
So where'd the inspiration come for Villains and Henchmen?
So this is something that is a bit of a hybrid story. The inspiration for the core game itself actually came from another game that Sarah and I played. Sarah's my wife, if I haven't already mentioned that. We played a game called Heroes of Metro City. That's a deck builder that says, oh, you're allowed to, every time you play, you build your own unique hero and you defeat bad guys and stuff like that. And we didn't feel like it quite delivered on that promise. We kind of felt like the way the game was set up, or the way the game was designed, every player ended up with the same powers. And so it didn't really feel like it was that unique when you built your hero out. And so we kind of just thought, like, how would we do it differently to kind of scratch the itch that we were looking to have scratched? And so we started designing the game, kind of the core game as it stands now. And then randomly, I think it was Sarah actually who was like, maybe we should play the villains in this game. And it kind of just went from there. So the villain thing wasn't part of the core experience from the very beginning, but it was introduced fairly early on. Awesome.
So besides that, during playtesting, did you ever have to scrap anything besides changing to the villains that just wouldn't work either?
We did, yeah. A couple of smaller rules, things like we had a fairly complicated, I had a fairly complicated rule for like heroes that were flying and versus villains that were flying, and like this weird interaction with the hero had to have range, it hit a flying villain, and vice versa. And it was unnecessarily complicated. So we stripped it down and just said that, heroes have flying, villains need range to hit them. And it just streamlined the whole process a lot.
Awesome. And so if I heard on the Kickstarter video, it talks about you're trying to break the villains out of prison. Is that correct?
Yeah. The core kind of narrative behind the game is that you are trying to break a fellow villain out of maximum security prison. And the game, we don't actually go into like a specific reason why. We don't say which villain is in prison. It's kind of left abstracted. You can come up with your own kind of story for the reasons behind it. But that's kind of the justification for everybody working together as bad guys, is that they need to break in to a prison and get a guy out, or get a fellow villain out.
Awesome. And if I understood you correctly watching the video and looking at the Kickstarter page, it sounds like it's somewhat co-op, but then it's also not co-op because one person will win and become the villain, the other people the henchmen. Am I right?
That's correct. So we like to say that it's a 95% cooperative game in that you have to work together to defeat the prison itself. Once you defeat the prison, though, everybody gets to look at like their little bank of villain points that they've accumulated by defeating heroes and guards over the course of the game. And whoever has the most villain points gets to claim that they were the villain and everybody else was just their henchman. So it's not like that one person is the exclusive winner. It's just they earned bragging rights among the team. So you win or lose together, but one person gets to basically be like, yep, I was the cool kid.
Awesome. Yeah, I really like that 5% because we're not too much into co-ops, but I like that 5% though. So you can go ahead and still have somebody be the victor.
Yeah, it was something that actually kind of tying back in with your earlier question about things that we changed during design. Originally, we designed it as purely a cooperative thing. And one of the first bits of feedback we got was, well, but if you're playing bad guys, why isn't there some opportunity to do villainous things? And so that's where we kind of came up with the mechanic for the villain points, and it actually opened up a number of opportunities for us to introduce some new design elements in some of the powers and even in the different prison settings. So that instead of just having one hero that you had to defeat in order to kind of win the prison, you had two. And so the first person to defeat one of those heroes gets to choose, do I want to keep this for my own points or do I want to put it on the victory pile to help win the game? And that kind of dictates the pace of the game. And it's always interesting to watch people be villainous by claiming that first hero as points, because then everybody else kind of has to react to that. And it sets an interesting dynamic.
Per se, man, you were to sit down to play villains and henchmen, how would that look, Ben? Wait, I mean, how would it sound? This is a podcast after all.
So it would be a lot of shuffling cards at the very beginning and then playing some cards. And then as we're playing cards on our turns, a lot of low-key swearing and cursing and wondering why the game hates us so much. Because it's cooperative, we tried to design it so that it was difficult to win. But basically every turn is divided up into phases. There's the refresh phase, the actions phase, and the events phase. And each phase has a list of steps, and you follow each step in order. Then you move on to the next phase. And once you get to the end of the events phase, it passes the next player's turn, and they do their refresh phase. So we try to design it so that turns go relatively quickly, so that you're not sitting for an extended period of time waiting for everybody else to finish their turns, but you still have kind of interesting and important choices that you have to make on your turn.
Awesome. So that's pretty cool. And it talks of, you talk of interesting choices you have to make on your turn and whatnot. I suffer from AP, or analysis paralysis. Are my friends going to hate me more when I play villains and henchmen?
So it's definitely the kind of game that requires a bit of reading. The cards have some text on them. Some cards have a little bit more text, kind of depending on how much information they have to convey. We did try to keep it as minimal as possible. Little tongue-tied there. But sometimes in order to get a really cool effect on a power or a hero or whatever, it has to have a little bit more text on it. But that said, once you have played it a couple of times, the different powers are fairly easy to grasp what they do. So a couple of times in, and you'll know the vast majority of the powers that are out on the table. And so the turns will go even quicker the more often you play it.
Well, that's awesome. And you talked about it being, you talked about a hero deck builder game was the inspiration behind it, but it looks like this is different. If I read correctly, it's a hand management game?
Yes. So hand management, variable player power, table or tableau building game. Those are different kind of game mechanics that people have used to describe villains and henchmen. And you basically have a little player reference card, and it's got a spot for your archetype, which you get at right at the very beginning of the game. It's got 4 spots at the top of the card for the different power cards you can buy, and then down at the bottom, it's got a bank for defense, villain points, and power surges. And so when you buy a power, it goes into one of your power spaces. starting with power 1, then power 2, etc. And then on your turn, those powers are available for you to use every turn, or on each of your turns, I should say. So unlike a deck builder where you basically buy the card, you shuffle it into a deck, and you may or may not get it on your next turn, those powers are always available to you. You just end up with a limited number of powers that you can have. So you have to make kind of, it kind of goes back to the making those critical decisions. Do I want this power? Do I want that power? Which one is going to help me now versus which one do I think will help me more down the line? So that's what we were going for.
Oh, okay, yeah. So with the tableau building, I don't know if that's the right mechanic or not, but it reminded me somewhat of Seven Wonders, where I collect we recently played that at my game group this last Thursday night or Tuesday, whenever we do it, I forget. But where I collect different resources or whatnot, and then I have the opportunity to use those resources during my turn.
Yeah, something like that. I haven't played Seven Wonders in a few years, but as I recall, you do kind of have like a little player board, and you are setting cards down or setting resources down and kind of building them up so you can do stuff with them, which is a similar concept for Villains and Henchmen. Not exactly the same, but similar.
So, yeah, so that's pretty cool. What would you say is the thing you're most proud of when it comes to Villains and Henchmen?
I'd have to say it's the number of times I watch people play it, and they all think, I'm watching 4 people who have never played before playing through it, and they think, oh, we've got this. They're looking at the board, and the heroes are on the ropes, and everybody's got a good power or a couple of powers, and they're well on their way to kind of like victory. And they're like, okay, as long as this one thing doesn't happen, and then the event deck does that one thing, and it's almost like the game is listening to the players, because it happens a lot, and I love that because. Again, we designed it to be a little bit more difficult because it's a mostly cooperative game. If it was too easy, you wouldn't come back. So it's always fun to watch the game basically go, oh, you don't want that thing to happen? Well, let's see what we can do about that. So that's the thing I'm most proud of.
Awesome. And you talked of earlier, wanting to play, or that you've played Dark Souls, the board game and whatnot. If I recall, I listened to a couple interviews and whatnot, and the video game, it sounds like that's supposed to be a pretty hard game, as well as the video game being pretty hard. Is that kind of what you were going for, making Villains and Henchmen pretty hard?
It is, yeah. My wife and I are big fans of the Pandemic board game as well. Like I mentioned, the Reign of Cthulhu thing is kind of an offshoot of that. And Pandemic is a purely cooperative game that has a fairly high learning curve. I mean, there are people out there, I'm sure, who've played it enough that they know exactly how to exploit different things and beat it every time. That's not us. When we play it, it's about a 50-50 chance that we win. And we wanted to kind of recreate that experience, just because it is more fun if, you work together really well and you don't quite manage to win. So then you play again and you try to implement the same strategy, and you have to kind of adapt it on the fly for the new kind of scenario that's unfolding. I'm always loath to compare our game to Dark Souls, just because it's kind of a cliche to say that something is the Dark Souls of board games or whatever. But it's definitely a design kind of approach that we wanted to take. So take that for what you will, Internet. I did not say that Villains and Henchmen is the Dark Souls of board games.
There you go. Yeah, you heard it here first on Getting Geeky with Gamer Leaf, or maybe you're on other podcasts telling people this as well, are you?
No, actually, this is the first time that the Dark Souls board game or a video game has come up during a discussion of Villains and Henchmen. So,
well, there you go. Awesome. Now, per se, somebody's fallen asleep, Ben. It wouldn't be because of you or this great game. It'd be because of me and my podcast. We're almost into the month of August, and since the first of the year, we've already released 123 episodes. So by the time this releases, we'll be close to in between 125, 130 episodes or whatnot. So they sometimes it's neither been confirmed nor denied, so I'm going to keep rolling with it until one of my fans tells me otherwise. But sometimes they get tired of hearing me drone on and on, so they fall asleep. But suddenly they're jolted awake, so they don't hit the oncoming traffic, and you have their full attention now, Ben. Why should they take a chance on Villains and Henchmen, especially with all the other great games that are out there on the Kickstarters currently?
Well, I would say that it's probably because you get to play your very own custom comic book supervillain every time you play the game. And played a lot of different games, and in the board game realm, I don't know that there's any other game like it. You know, you could always play an RPG where you get to roll up a supervillain type character. But as far as board games go, my wife and I haven't seen anything like this. And who doesn't want to play the bad guys from time to time, right? Like, you don't always want to be the hero saving the world. Sometimes you want to be the one that's threatening the world.
Yeah, so that's really cool. You can be the villain. I know like I said, me and my family really like the villains and whatnot in different movies and stuff. So that's awesome. And this time you get to be the villains and henchmen. And we'll make sure we leave all the links in the show notes so they don't have to go ahead and type it in. They can just suddenly, after they wake up and pull over to the side of the road, they can go ahead and click that link and then at least check out the Kickstarter page so they can see if there's something that they want to go after and get, so they can become the villains and break one of them out of prison, and the other people can be their henchmen or whatnot. Now, I know you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, Ben, so if somebody does go ahead and take a chance on villains and henchmen, when would they anticipate getting their game so they can get that villain out of prison?
So we are looking at a delivery date in March of 2019. So that is from the end of the Kickstarter. That is September, October, November, December, January, February, March. That's about 7 months. And we did build in a little bit of a buffer time there, just because we know that sometimes customs and importing overseas and everything like that can cause some delays. So we're aiming for it to be sooner than that, but we planned for it to be a little longer just so that we don't end up, like you said, over-promising and under-delivering.
Per se, somebody hasn't. I don't know why they wouldn't have. Maybe they were sleeping a little bit too long and they haven't had a chance to pull over and click that link. But so they're listening and they haven't gone there yet. What is Villains and Henchmen going to put somebody back, or what's it going to cost them?
So if you are buying the game, kind of just the game, the base pledge level, it's $40, and then the additional shipping would be charged later on via the backer survey. We're estimating that to be about $15 based on the weight of the game and everything, but it might be less than that. That's kind of it's a safe estimate. But we also do local pickup. So if you are in Southern California and you come to any of the conventions that we go to, then you can always pick it up from us directly, save the shipping. So yeah, $55 with shipping and everything like that.
Cool. And I saw something. Is there a player mat too?
There is. So the base game actually comes with a paper or kind of a heavier cardstock play mat. Full color, full artwork, everything like that to kind of help with organizing a game. But if you want something a little bit more permanent, because we all know that, after a few folds and unfolds of those cardboard or paper mats, they do end up kind of dissolving into nothing. We are including a neoprene playmat as a paid add-on, and that would be an additional $40 plus a little bit extra for the shipping just because of the bulk and the size of it. But that's something that, again, would be handled during the backer survey a little bit later down the line. So
awesome. Yeah, we always like the neoprene mat, so that's pretty cool. Now, so at least go ahead and check out that link that we'll leave in the show notes so you can check out and see Villains and Henchmen. And then if you really want to be the villain and you go ahead and show Ben that you can beat the game, which sounds like it's pretty hard, but you can go ahead and beat the game, go ahead and back this great Kickstarter and whatnot. Now, I know you've been busy running the Kickstarter and stuff, so you haven't necessarily had a chance to listen to our podcast. That's okay. But the next portion of the podcast is called Adventures in Application Acquisition, where we talk about an app, be it for your cell phone, your tablet, your computer, or even a video game. And it doesn't even necessarily have to deal with tabletop board games or breaking villains out of prison or anything like that. Is there an app you use a lot of that we can talk about for a moment, Ben?
Ooh, that I use a lot of. I play a lot of Sudoku on my phone, so that's one. But I'd say the one that probably gets the most use from me, I play a lot of the X-Wing miniatures game from Fantasy Flight. And there is a really good squad builders app. It's called the X-Wing Squads Designer app. And it's free to download. They keep it really well updated, and I just absolutely love this thing. It lets me build all kinds of squad lists and keep all my whole collection in order. I think it's an absolute must-have if you are an X-Wing player.
Okay, so I know I haven't played it per se. There's other people on my podcast that haven't played it as well. So how's the app go? Does that, when you talk about squad building, is that building like your army or whatnot of ships?
Yeah, exactly. So it basically divides the different ships up between the three factions, Rebel, Scum, and Empire. And then you can go in and indicate what your collection is. So if you bought a certain number of, one expansion, you just put that number in your collection list, and then it will automatically give you all the upgrade cards and the ship pilots and everything like that to choose from in the actual squad list for those factions. And so you can basically say, I want to build a squad that's this many points, I want these pilots, I want these upgrades, and it keeps track of everything. And you can save those squads for future reference, so that if you don't want to have to build a fresh squad every time you play the game, you can just pull it open, grab one of your saved squads, and then all you have to do is just dig those pieces out of your collection, put them together, and you're ready to play. So it really is an awesome app.
Awesome. So that sounds cool. So per se, you own the rights to, what was the app? What's the name of the app again?
It's the X-Wing Squads Designer app, and I want to say it is... So it's David Martinez, Borkue. I'm gonna say Bork, but that's probably wrong, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, David, because you really do deserve a lot of credit for this thing.
Okay, so per se, you own the rights to the app. Ben, what would be one thing you would do to fix it or make it better?
Make it easier to export stuff from the app onto my computer. That's probably the biggest thing. It can be done, but it's not the most convenient way to doing it. I think you actually have to actually have an account with them and make a little donation in order for that to happen. But I've kind of just gotten used to using it on my phone, so I'm not even sure that's 100% accurate. So if I misrepresented that, David, I apologize.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so we try to make a green podcast around here. So if that is the truth, if he didn't misrepresent it or whatnot, you heard it here first on Getting Geeky with Gamerleaf, what Ben would do to make it a better app or whatnot. But it sounds like he likes it pretty much anyway, so that's awesome. Now, we don't want to keep you all night, Ben, but minus coming there to California, it sounds like, how would people go about keeping up with you and... Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah, we don't want to keep you all night. So minus coming there to California to stalk you in person, how would people go about keeping up with you and what you guys have going over at Ravensdale Publishing and Villains and Henchmen especially?
So you can find our website. It's ravensdaleprintandgames.com, all one word, no punctuation. You can find us on Facebook, ravensdale.publishing. Twitter is @ravenspublish. And you can also actually find a preview digital version of the game on Tabletop Simulator. If you just go into the Steam Workshop, into Tabletop Simulator, it's right there under Villains and Henchmen. So you can actually give it a playthrough with a few friends and try it out. And if you like what you see, you can back the Kickstarter.
And is that something that's going to cost to be able to go and play that on Tabletop Simulator, or how's that work?
So if someone already has a copy of Tabletop Simulator, then the Villains and Henchmen Workshop add-on does not cost anything. But if they had to buy Tabletop Simulator, then that would be, I think it's $19.99 via, at least in U.S. currency, so via the Steam app.
Oh, okay, awesome. So yeah, there you go. If you have that app or whatnot, or if you don't, you can go ahead and at least check it out as well, so you don't have to necessarily put over the money and see if it's something that you like. And then either way, I would encourage you to go ahead and click on that link so you can go ahead and at least check out the Kickstarter page or whatnot. And we'll leave if you go ahead and get us the links, Ben will make sure we leave links in the show notes so they can go ahead and find all of this great information on how they can even try the game out before they buy it and whatnot. So that's awesome. Yeah, like I said, we don't want to keep you all night, but we really appreciate you coming on Getting Geeky with Gamerleaf to talk all about Villains and Henchmen with us tonight, Ben.
This is my pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and chat with you and to talk to your audience.
Gamerleaf levels up. Tune in next week to see if Gamerleaf's luck holds up.